our presentation today. My name is Neil Witte. I'm a Master Cicerone. I am the Associate Director of Exams with Cicerone Certification Program. And I want to welcome everybody here to our presentation entitled, Do Beer Styles Matter? We're going to talk about beer styles, their relevance, where they fit into everybody's different world. We've got a great panel here that's going to discuss this. Should be pretty interesting for everybody. Happy to see more people showing up. Before we get going, I want to mention a couple of things. If you're watching this on YouTube Live, hit that subscribe button. You are linked in with the Cicerone YouTube channel. And there's all kinds of really good stuff that you can access through the Cicerone YouTube channel. A couple of years ago, we did a whole series of presentations called the CBS Prep Talks. CBS is the Certified Beer Server exam. That's our level 1 exam. And I hosted, I don't know, maybe 15 or so different 45-minute to an hour-long discussions on different topics that help people prepare for taking and passing that exam. We did a tasting together series where a few of us would get together and discuss a given beer style and go in depth into that style. Some really great stuff there. Last year, you may have seen the conversation that I had with beer author and writer Evan Rail, based in the Czech Republic. And we talked for over an hour about side pull faucets, which was really interesting. We did a panel discussion late last year on holiday meals, what to pair with your Thanksgiving dinner or holiday dinner. So we do all kinds of fun stuff like that. This conversation is being recorded in a similar fashion and will be posted at the YouTube channel, the Cicerone YouTube channel. So if you want to find out about any upcoming events, different things we've got going on in that vein, hit that subscribe button and you'll get alerts and you can access all of these things after the fact. And if for whatever reason you're watching this and you're like, oh, dang, I got to split here in 5 minutes and I can't watch, you can come back later and you'll be able to watch the recorded version of this conversation. So let's go ahead and start our conversation here. We're going to talk about beer styles. Why do beer styles matter? So, if you've ever talked about beer, and if you're here, you almost certainly have talked about beer, at least at some point, you've at least scratched the surface of beer styles. Style language is the language that we all use to communicate the basics of beer to each other. So if I'm drinking a beer and I want to share a beer with you, I say, this is an American pale ale, that gives you an idea of what that beer is, what to expect when you drink that beer. So on some basic level, beer styles do matter. But we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into how these distinctions and how these breakdowns apply in different areas of the beer business and with different beer drinkers, and what's applicable and what level of detail is really relevant today. Beer styles, really, as we understand them today, we owe this in large part, the current framework of beer styles, to the beer writer Michael Jackson. In 1977, he published a book, The World Guide to Beer. And this really gave us the first building blocks and the framework of modern beer style categories. We didn't really have much in that way before. So his work and Fred Eckert, an American beer writer, the late Fred Eckert, both, helped to develop the early framework of these styles that ended up being the first framework for the Beer Judge Certification Program guidelines. This was a lot of what we're talking about. A lot of this framework that we discussed today for beer styles stems from the original work of those two guys. when you look at beer styles now and how it's grown, I think some of the questions arise about relevance of some of the styles that have developed in recent years. When you look at the scope of the style guidelines today, the Beer Judge Certification Program, or BJCP for short, has well over 100 categories of beer. The Brewers Association, who keeps their own style guidelines, has also, well over 100 categories and different styles of beer outlined. So it does make some people wonder if all of this really matters and how much of that really does matter. So we're here to discuss it. And to discuss this here, our panel includes Certified Cicerone Suzanne Schalow. Suzanne is the co-founder of Craft Beer Cellar, a modest group of craft beer bottle shops and tap rooms located throughout the U.S. from Vermont to Virginia to Florida. Suzanne is also Director of Operations for Craft Beer Initiative, Craft Beer Cellar's flagship location in Belmont, Massachusetts, and now Trinktisch, a beer hall for all, also located on the Belmont campus. Welcome, Suzanne. We've also got Master Cicerone, Brian Reed. Brian has held a variety of commercial and production roles at Miller Coors, Copper Kettle Brewing Company, Founders Brewing Company, and is currently Director of Sales and Marketing at Sly Fox Brewing Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He also maintains his role as an education consultant for the Pittsburgh Brewers Guild and teaches courses for the Cicerone Certification Program. Thank you, Brian. Welcome. We also have Advanced Cicerone Chris Shields. Chris is the Director of Education for Rhinegeist Brewery in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he performs staff, partner, and public training on beer and brewing. Before this role, Chris served as a brewer during Rhinegeist's rapid growth, developed their cider program, and has over 10 years of experience in the craft beer industry. And finally, we have Advanced Cicerone Jason Harper. Jason is the lead of brewing operations and owner at Stemma Brewing Company in Bellingham, Washington. Previously, he spent 8 years in beverage distribution with a focus on craft beer sales and education. Jason is part of the teaching team for the Craft Brewing Academy at Skagit Valley College. Welcome, panelists. We've got a wide variety of people from a whole bunch of different parts of the business that are going to give us some great perspective on beer styles. And I just want to kick this off by asking a really simple question. I already talked a little bit about what you do, but I want to start by going around and asking everybody to talk a little bit more about what they do and how you use style categories in your work with what you do on a daily basis. And I want to start with you, Suzanne. Why don't you kick that off? How do you use beer style categories in your job?
Thank you so much, Neil. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, I mean, I'm here looking at stuff that I didn't get finished in my job today. Things, new items coming in, trying to get those new items in the point of sale system over at the bottle shop, Craft Beer Cellar Belmont. And I was just reminded that in the pandemic, when things really shifted to online purchasing, that we made a decision based on what we really wanted to do was create a beer website that worked really well for the consumer. In other words, we thought they wanted to shop by style as well as by brewery and other things. And we had things really detailed kind of by the BJCP style guideline, and we ended up sort of changing them and just kind of writing things like Belgian beer and then, blonde and dark and, things that we thought made a little bit more sense to the consumer. And so, yeah, we restructured everything in 2020 internally, at the Belmont shop and then up on the web portal for the rest of the stores. And so, yeah, I mean, beer styles are a critical part of everything I do every single day, from the bottle shop side to, getting things kicked off at Trinktisch with a 36 tap system, where we don't have any. We have no standard beers that, like Rhinegeist has a tap handle or Allagash has a tap handle. Everything is by style. All the lines are by style. So it's like we'll always have a Belgian wheat beer or a lighter Belgian, sort of under the 7% alcohol range. We'll always have, a Belgian golden that maybe a Saison, but it also may be like a Duvel that's, a little bit a little bit not a saison and a little bit stronger in alcohol. And, you know, and covering the styles, you know, we'll have some traditional British or UK styles, you know, that are started a little bit warmer, you know, some mild, some porters. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't, at least from my perspective, there's a lot of leniency, I think, in the styles. I don't think we've all sort of figured that out yet, but, and, you know, we could do another one of these sessions on IPA alone, right? To sort of, you know, we could hammer that out and, you know, try to figure out where things fit. But generally speaking, you know, I bow to styles every day. If it weren't for beer styles, I don't know how we would march forward on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I've been to your Belmont shop several times, and I've been to a bunch of other craft beer cellar locations around the country. And, you know, one of the things that stood out to me about your stores is how everything is organized by style. When you go into, you know, your regular liquor store, it's not always done by that. It's often, you know, a lot of times it's by brand. So you've got brand families all kind of grouped together. But yours in particular is very organized by style, and you seem to cover most of the bases. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, and have you tried selling beer, you know, organized by brand as opposed to by style, and you know, like what perspective you have on selling beer one way versus the other?
Never have we focused on selling by brand. A little bit in the beginning, in the first 2 or 3 years, we were by region or you know, by country or by state, if you will. And so because of that, you'd see, you know, all the Finback beers together in the cold box, or you'd see all the Boulevard beers together in the Missouri section. I think it kind of lent itself to, you know, the beer selling by brand, if you will, but we were really focused on region. I mean, you know, Neil, when we made the decision to make the change, I felt that I might be beaten a little bit, you know, because it's, you know, we know a lot of the people in the industry, and I consider them my friends, and to go to those people and say, I'm going to rip your brand apart, and I'm going to put it all over the store, or, you know, some of it's going to be in the cold box, and some of it's going to be over in the barrel age section. I think, it's just not the way we had been thinking in this industry. And so it was definitely the less popular opinion. But, you know, when we started to have those conversations, we certainly assured people that we were going to sell the beer with the same care and the same, you know, kind of the hand touch that we had been doing it before. I feel like it's more well received, and I think it makes more sense to the customers to have things by style. The conversations that I do have about the differences, I'm getting more of a positive feel or feedback from customers that definitely may have seen the store before when it was by region or by, you know, geography, and now they're like, oh, it's just so much better. You know, we have a barrel age section, and it's also nice for the people that work in the operation, because we can just sort of say, look, everything that touches a barrel is in, you know, it's in this section. And they're like, oh, so it's wood. And we're like, no, if it touches a barrel, it could be stainless steel. You know, there are some examples of, you know, stainless steel fermentation, but if it's in a barrel or spends any time in a barrel, it's going to be in this section. And in many cases, we'll cross things in both the imperial stout section and in the barrel aged section. But I'm happier. I'm not sure I felt like I was going to be. I think I was answering and fielding a lot of questions, both from store owners, but, you know, from friends in the industry that I think they were pretty upset in the beginning, thinking that we were going to rip these brands apart and put them by style. But I think it's worked out pretty well. And more than anything else, I think we've increased the awareness of craft beer for consumers that may not have known, or customers that may not have known, because the accessibility is so great, and that went way up, you know, when we changed it.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's probably an opportunity to highlight some lesser brands within a brand family, where, you know, if you're grouping 5 different beers together from a single brewery, maybe everybody's always reaching for that flagship or the one that's always sells the most and kind of overlooking something else where, maybe depending on how you're presenting it, you're highlighting this brand that maybe doesn't sell as much and you're putting it in a different context. So I could see, it's a different way of approaching it. And I always, just doing what I do, I always enjoy shopping your stores for that reason. So yeah, that's a great perspective. And I think another good perspective, this, what is great about this panel is because everybody does a little bit something different. Brian, I want to toss this same question over to you. You are the director of sales for a brewery, and you are dealing with distributors and retailers, and I'd like to get your perspective on how beer styles matter to you. Like what are the relevance to you with what you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, sure. So from a commercial perspective, I guess I should probably specify right off the bat, at Fly Fox, we definitely focus, I would say probably disproportionately compared to a lot of craft breweries, on classic styles. I mean, our top two selling beers are Helles Lager and a Northern German Pils, right? So we definitely focus a little bit more heavily on some of those classic European specifically styles. But yeah, so especially differentiating offerings when we're building out a brand calendar, for example, for the year, and we're putting different mixes of year-round beers versus kind of in and out limited release beers. It's important to be able to speak to the differences in beer styles when I'm working to differentiate those offerings to really, frankly, every level of the three-tier system. I mean, wholesalers or distributors specifically are our customer, really, as a brewery. So we're selling the beer to the distributors, but then obviously we're working closely with retailers to deplete the inventory that we sell to the brewers so we can sell them more, or to the distributors so we can sell them more beer, right? So when we're talking to distributors, I mean, here's a great example. Right now, we just wrapped up our spring seasonal, launched our summer seasonal, and our spring seasonal is a grisette. We also have our Saison Voss on tap right now, and just a draft only offering at retail and at all 6 of our pubs. We also currently have our Maibach on tap, and we have a smoked Hellesbach. So as you might imagine, we're probably having conversations with a little deeper degree of minutia involved when we're talking to our wholesalers about, hey, we have 40 half barrels of your Maibach in on our floor right now. Why do we bring in the Hellesbach too? Well, here's how they are different, right? The Maibach, in our estimation, and our impression of that beer is, basically a pale version of traditional Bock beer, and then our Hellesbach, is kind of our Helles brewed to Bock strength, and we add some smoked malts. So being able to give that quick elevator speech and why these beers are drastically different, because if they were just to read the names of the items, even the brand names, in an email or from a sell sheet or something like that, we might not be able to communicate that in as concise of a way, in a way that's going to grab their attention.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're able to more easily communicate some subtle differences between some styles that you have that, otherwise there may be a little confusion as to what some of the difference is.
Yeah, and it translates bottom line for us into, being able to sell more beer. If they might take, we'll bring in 1 or 2. Well, actually, it's a quite different beer for a different occasion and potentially appealing to a different drinker. Being able to differentiate that, especially when you launch something new and say, hey, we've got our grisette. What's that? What's a grisette? Well, Saison Voss. You guys know that beer. You're familiar with Saison. Well, hey, it's kind of more of like a session strength version of that. It's got a little bit more wheat in the grain bill, so it gives you a jumping off point to have those a little bit deeper conversations. And obviously you can mirror that conversation down to retailers and even drinkers as well.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're you rely quite a bit on these style distinctions and, this structure, be it BJCP or BA or whatever, these guidelines, wherever you pull them from, they're all fairly similar in a lot of ways, but you rely quite a bit on that to sell beer and to communicate the characteristics of those beers to your customers.
Yeah, and even from an ideation standpoint, when we're planning kind of our innovation pipeline, myself, we're a relatively small team. We're sitting there with the head of brewing operations, some of our brewers, myself, the president of the brewery. There's a handful of us in the room, and we start talking about, boy, wouldn't it be cool if we had like a Vienna lager, and then we did this something unique with it in this capacity. You know what I mean? And for someone to be able to say Vienna lager, and we all have a rough estimate of what that consists of in our head, saves a lot of time and make sure we're kind of, on the same page as well in terms of, building what that liquid's going to look like.
Nice. So Jason, I want to kind of toss this conversation to you now, as a brewer and brewery owner. A little bit of a different perspective, maybe from the sales end, and how do beer styles work in your world, and what does that mean to you with what you're doing on a daily basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we approach it kind of from a couple of different angles, or I do. I think when I'm writing the recipes, I'm maybe looking at it a little different than when I'm kind of put on my hat as far as I'm also helping manage our tap room. And so I'm looking at it from a lot of angles, and I try to blend those. And for us, a big part of it is we're using styles as a marketing tool, and we're starting there, and we're working backwards with the beers we're brewing. We're trying to figure out how to market the beer to the consumer. And it's, we as a brewery, we're definitely right now chasing a lot of the trends. And I think we're doing a lot of the styles that maybe aren't as set in stone. And they're maybe, we're using a base style as kind of, we're using a style to explain the base beer, but then we're saying, hey, we added raspberries to this Pilsner, or, we just released an Imperial Pilsner aged in tequila barrels. And so again, as it's been previously mentioned, we need that style as sort of that anchor point, so that people know what realm we're talking about. But then we're often adding these sort of adjunct words to further explain what we've done to maybe change it, because we're often not necessarily brewing true to style. One example of that is a beer that we call a black Pilsner. And it's essentially a Czech dark. And what we found is that our consumer really doesn't know what a Czech dark is. And explaining that to the customer was challenging. So we brewed a Czech dark, and we called it the black Pilsner. And the feedback generally from our tap room is that people get it. They're like, oh, that makes total sense. Pilsner is a style that's very well understood in our region. And they're like, got it. Okay. And then, oh, black malts, got it. They taste it and it makes sense. And so that's one thing I think in our tap room, we're explaining, we're putting things on our menu that maybe just are sort of non-styles to more to sell the beer. Another thing we're doing with our menu, I was thinking about this as Suzanne was talking, is we have our menu color coded, and we have it in roughly 5 different sort of rough categories. So our beers are hoppy is green for us. Any beer that's somewhat malty is red. Special, so for us would be barrel aged or fruited, is going to be in teal. Anything light, which for the most part means lager, and our with what we're brewing is going to be yellow, and then all our dark beers are dark blue. And that those are our 5 brand colors. So again, it brings in it's very much, when you look at the menu, you get it. It's like that's Stemma. Those are their 5 brand colors, but they're also describing the beer, rough style sort of groupings.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're using some of the basics of these existing style categories. Sometimes just straight up that style category, but other times maybe working it a little bit to try and to sell that beer specifically, and you're sometimes departing from that actual style category, like the black pills thing. That's a great story. That's a great example of maybe a little bit of a departure. If you look at style categories, you're not going to see a black pills anywhere, but your average beer drinker who hasn't been studying style guidelines or doesn't even know much about it, they might know what a pills is, and they know it's going to be a dark pills. So that means more to them coming into your tap room than a Czech dark lager. So yeah, I can see how that might benefit you from being able to depart from that a little bit and just use more everyday descriptive language for your customers to be able to appeal to them a little bit more. It's really interesting. And Chris, you're primarily an educator, so I'd like to hear your perspective. I mean, my guess is you're definitely a proponent of the set style guidelines, but I'd like to hear a little bit about how, what styles mean to you, and how it affects, what you do for a living.
Yeah, Neil, you're right. It's funny because it's kind of both. As an educator, I work with everybody from people that aren't really even beer drinkers yet to people that are, really advanced in their knowledge. And styles are really important to that conversation, but I think sometimes we can get hung up on them as well. And finding that balance of, everybody's kind of talking about these examples of depth with a style. And I think that's an important thing to think about is, styles are a guideline. They're context. The depth and the level of explanation, the level of specificity that you want to bring to a style should fit what your goal is. And, that's why I think that what Suzanne does at Craft Beer Cellar, I think that makes perfect sense because, as a brewery, what we might put on a label, and there's a whole nother caveat to what is even allowed to be put on a label that we don't need to get into. But, what we may choose to put on a label maybe isn't the most helpful for a consumer or a consumer in a certain area. It's very different someone coming into our tap room in Cincinnati and having the opportunity to talk to one of our bartenders and talk to our staff and ask questions versus going into a convenience store or a grocery store, the sort of where they don't get any other context and what's on the bottle or the can is all they've got. And having that, things put together the way that Craft Beer Cellar does, I think that makes sense from a consumer perspective, even though I might, ideally want all my beer to be, beautiful in a nice little section all by itself. I understand that. And that motivation to, choose by occasion or choose by characteristic. And that's really a lot of what I spend my time doing is kind of understanding and sharing what I think are sort of the high level points of a style or a beer and tying that to style. And, I sent an email out about every single beer that we release to our whole team of, 300 people that work at Rheingeist. And they have a really broad level of knowledge. And so I have to think about okay, well, here's the official style, the registered legal style name. How much context do I want to give to that? And I think Jason's point about, black pills is great. I mean, I always talk about, if I say, blueberry Hefeweizen, sure, that's not a classic traditional Hefeweizen, but what I'm talking about if you're familiar with, German wheat beers. And I think getting people in that first step is the biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity. Brian talked about using the style as an opportunity to have that next conversation. And I think that's really from my perspective, that's kind of my starting point. And my audience really determines, how far I'm going to go in that in that conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure that's really helpful especially when you're doing internal training. You know, I was an educator trainer for a brewery for a long time, and a lot of times we had to have some type of grounding point for what is this new beer. And sometimes we would have a beer that I needed to educate our staff on, I needed to educate our distributors on and our retailers, and it didn't fit into a nice box. Or maybe it had a style name on the label that didn't really match what the style really was. And so, you know, I had to teach them how to kind of navigate that a little bit. Like, all right, here's the grounding point. Like this beer, you know, officially if we were going to enter this into competition, this would be the style, but this is the style that we're calling it. Or this is actually a hybrid of like this style and this style. So, you know, when I was doing that work, those style categories were a bit of a grounding point where we could kind of jump off from there and say, okay, this doesn't fit the category, but you know, here's a great way you can explain it to your customers. You know, when talking to the sales team, here's how you go to market with this beer. Say it's like this style, but it's, you know, it's got a little bit of this style mixed in or whatever, but you use that style category as the grounding point. That was really helpful to me when I was doing that kind of work.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes to, it's both the benefit and the detriment to some extent, right? I just earlier today sent an email out to our team about an alt beer that we have coming out. And I got a response to that email, and it was like, so how is this different from an amber ale? And my response was, it is an amber ale, right? Like it's an ale and it's amber. So I think sometimes we get a little caught up in trying to differentiate everything, and we forget that a lot of these styles are just based on geography or ingredients, and the experience of it may be the same. You know, there's a lot of opportunity. You know, there aren't hard lines between styles as I sit drinking an Imperial IPA, but there's that opportunity for education and sharing and saying, like, you know, okay, amber ale, you know, Bock is always the example I give. Like Bock is strength, right? So there's, you know, Brian's talking about all these, by the way, delicious sounding Bocks that I want to try, but there's so much nuance within all these categories that it gives you that opportunity to share.
Yeah, and that point you're bringing up kind of is a great way to transition into the next question that I've got here. Is, you know, sometimes there's this level of nuance that can be kind of confusing to people, and I think this is maybe one of the reasons why occasionally, if I'm, you know, flipping through Twitter or I'm like overhearing conversations in a tap room, occasionally I come across some real disdain for beer styles on behalf of either people in the business sometimes or regular beer drinkers. And, you know, so I think just the mere fact that we have organized a whole panel discussion on do beer styles matter implies that there's some level of hesitation to really embrace these categorizations. So, you know, why would people hate on styles? Like, what's the point of contention with categorization? You know, one of the things that I think of is maybe the inappropriate use of a level of detail in a certain context. For example, if I'm sitting on my porch, you know, and I'm sitting with my friend, and he says, oh, you know, he gives me a beer and says, oh, this is an amber ale. I'm like, that's not an amber ale. That's an American pale ale. And you know, and I start breaking down the differences between them. It's like, well, my friend's just going to get annoyed with me because I'm being pedantic about some insignificant difference between these styles in that context. We're hanging out on the porch drinking beer. It should be fun. Like, this is not the time and place for that level of distinction. So, you know, I think that may be some source of some disdain for a level of style discussion. And, also just the proliferation of so many new styles and subcategories of particular styles. Namely, I mean, the big gorilla in the room there is, or elephant in the room, mixing my metaphors here, would be IPA. There's so many subcategories of IPA. Like, does this even mean anything anymore? Like, what does it mean to be like a brute IPA or a cold IPA? I mean, these are not necessarily styles that are outlined in particular in some, with some of these officially published styles, but you get my point. So, sometimes there's a level of detail that it gets broken down to, that it's unnecessary, or it kind of, some people have said that it kind of renders this whole thing meaningless. So I think, Suzanne, I want to toss this back to you, because, one of the things that I see is labels being kind of misleading. And that also, and I think part of this is a result of there being so many subcategories. Like, when I'm looking at an IPA in the store, sometimes I don't know, like, what it says it's an IPA. Is this like a classic American IPA, like a West Coast style? Is this a hazy IPA? Is this, I don't really know exactly what I'm looking at anymore. I don't know what to expect. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and what you're seeing at retail with this kind of level of confusion. If you have any pushback from customers about style categorization, and give me your perspective on that. Why people would hate on styles and
yeah, sure. I'd love to. I'd start by saying probably one of the reasons we're all kind of, we've met and we know each other through the Cicerone program is because there wasn't a lot of information out there at some point. And, we all wanted more. We wanted to know more. We wanted to understand beer better. And so we took the plunge and we did the work, and it's a lot. So my first point is, I still talk to people on a daily basis that say, is this a beer or an ale? And it's not a lot. It's not a ton of people, but that was a seriously strong culture. The lager culture of yesteryear, when lager, and there were 42 breweries, post, we illegal, we all know we know the story. We made it illegal to make beer and drink beer in this country. And then we said, no, it's not true. And, we know the stories. There were big lager breweries, and they took control, and that really made an impression on people. Is this a beer or an ale? And it's like, okay, it's a lager, and then we start, because, those of us that care, and I think all of us in this space care a lot about, educating people in the right way. We don't want to, I don't ever want somebody to feel put off by me talking about a beer style. So it's finding that right avenue to have that conversation. But I think my second point is that it's just a lot, right? And I think it looks like a lot, and it looks like a lot of work. And man, I kind of look back at sort of my journey at trying to figure out, if a alt beer is really, to Chris's point, is it really just an amber or a brown beer? And it's like, it is. And that's how, he's using some of those training points with his colleagues and his staff. But, you have to understand an alt beer to be able to confidently say that the ingredients, the grain ingredients, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I think it's a lot. And then, it's just to your point, Neil, about IPAs, it's like, it's also just such a quick moving, it's a quick moving ball. And it's like IPAs, it's like at the bottle shop, we have what we call Hop Highway, which is just super funny, right? It's just like on both sides, it's just walls of IPAs, and it's not a library by any stretch of the imagination. So we're rolling them over. A customer's in today. We probably won't see them again for 3 or 4 days, which is great. Because, they're usually taking out, 8 or 12 beers with them. And that's great for a few days in a, Celtics playoff game or whatever. I mean, chances are they're going to come back looking for that same beer, and it's not going to be in the same place. So part of that's our fault, and I say fault in a way that we want people to find your brewery the next time. We don't want to put beer in the same place, and we want them to need to ask or have to ask or wonder, and so we can have a deeper conversation about some of the things that are on labels, which are not bad. A lot of it's really funny, and some of it makes us wonder. We're like, I don't know if this is really traditional or clear or filtered, or as Jason was pointing out, we were talking before. Is there a difference between hazy and juicy? And I think so. I don't know that most people right now that are putting that on labels are differentiating the two. But, when I think about a beer like Stone IPA, Lagunitas IPA, those beers were super juicy way before their day. And, now people see them as like, this kind of out in left field, classic, maybe not hazy enough, or not new enough, not innovative enough for them. But anyway, that's my take on it. I think it's scary, and respectively so. We're all sitting here and we're able to have conversations about the nuances of beer styles, which I also believe are really important. As Brian points out, I mean, there's so many layers of just like a Munich Helles, right? There's just so many, and they're all wonderful if that's the style of beer, you kind of gravitate toward. And it's fun to either be able to go through those with, your local brewery, or to be able to visit, Germany in this case, and be able to see those beers in the wild and kind of get it, like, oh, okay, yeah, I get this is a little bit higher in alcohol, and I get this is a little bit higher than that. And, they're all, the same base malt, but this one's like less hops than a Pilsner. And, it's kind of fun. It's scary though. And we're close to it. We're all super close to it. We forget how scary it is.
Well, and the way you have things organized, like we talked about before, kind of gives you an opportunity to maybe clear up any confusion people are having right off the bat, because you've already kind of got that categorized for them ahead of time. Whereas, maybe some other retailers, maybe not so much, and it might be a little bit more difficult to get that message across of what is that beer. Yeah, that's good stuff there. Brian, I'm going to toss this back over to you. On your end, with as much as you guys really rely on these style categories, do you experience some pushback from people when you're discerning, when you're trying to explain the difference in front of say a distributor sales team between a Grisette and a Saison, or if you're at retail, trying to explain that to a buyer?
Yeah, not typically with wholesalers or retailers so much, because I find that knowledge is currency, right? Information is currency. So the more information that we can give them to explain the context of the beer and put them in a better spot to sell it on our behalf, and feel like they're giving their people, whether it be distributor sales reps, brand managers, merchandisers, front of house staff, whoever, if we are giving them more information, then they're going to feel more comfortable and empowered to have those conversations with whoever their, kind of constituents are. The people that I hear pushback from, and oftentimes it's indirect, are the occasional drinker. But really it's more industry folks, honestly. I would say if I had to count up the times I've heard pushbacks on beer styles, I would go as far as to say nine out of 10 of them are from brewers or industry professionals in some capacity. And it's usually, sometimes maybe 90% aggressive, but you get what I'm saying. It's usually one of a couple of things. Like, one, it's brewers who feel like styles are putting them in a position where it's boxing them in, or it's making them feel like the styles are restrictive or kind of encroaching on their creativity in some way, which, we kind of talked about a little bit, but just to kind of build off of what other people said, I mean, really, I think it's more the opposite. If anything, it's kind of just provides you that context by which to be creative. It's this idea of, if you don't know your medium and your method, I think Chris even said it, like, beer styles are usually just regional ways of making beer, right? From a particular specific snapshot in history. So the technology that was available during that time, the socioeconomic factors, it is a way of making beer in a particular place at a particular time, right? So you don't have to take those into consideration, but if you understand, the civic relationship that beer has throughout the centuries, then having that context about why something was made in a certain way during that time doesn't mean you have to mimic it, but it's part of knowing your like I said, your method and your medium. So I think people feel like they get boxed in and jump to conclusions in that way. I think there is a degree, you mentioned it, Neil, that people can be really kind of pedantic and aggressive around beer styles, and I think it can feel like a little bit of a gatekeeping thing in some instances, and I'll admit I've probably been guilty of that at times, just because my personal preference leads me towards stuff like that. So I think I have probably done that on occasion, which is obviously not cool, but I often do and say things that aren't cool. The other thing is I think there's this other part of, like, people rejecting the idea of their beer being judged on some standard that they don't care about or they don't understand. So whether it be in competitions, I mean, for those of us on this panel, I think probably all of us have judged beer in some capacity, whether it be in, at GABF or even on a homebrew level or something like that. And sometimes those judging situations can kind of be a little weird and toxic, and judgy in not a good, productive way. Or not to point fingers, but maybe it's untapped. You know what I mean? Brewers reading stuff about their beers and feeling that people are judging them on these forums against something that was completely separate from what they perceived their beer to be, so it can be frustrating. And then I would say, lastly, I think Suzanne might have mentioned it already, or some version of this, is there's also a sect of people who reject these things based on arrogance. I'll say arrogance and or laziness, which is a little bit of a I don't mean to sound crass, but this idea of, like, there's a certain sect of people who just kind of, they know enough to be dangerous, I would say, where they're chock full of knowledge, but not a lot of understanding, I guess would be a more diplomatic way of saying it. So they are very willing to, kind of spout off a lot of different, knowledge about things they know without having a really deep understanding of it. And they're really using it for posturing purposes or gatekeeping purposes. And I think people that do that, probably besmirch the good name of beer styles in a way. So those are like the most common instances that I see.
Yep. I totally agree. It's like the Untapped review of the alt beer is like more like an amber. I like it, but it's more like an amber, 1 star.
But pretty good for an oatmeal stout. Don't like oatmeal stouts, 1 star.
Yeah, exactly. We've all seen it.
Yeah.
So I like your point about how brewers may bristle at beer styles because they might feel like they're being judged on a standard that they were never even considering in the first place, or maybe that they're feeling boxed in somehow as well. I'd like to kind of take that thought over to Jason as a brewer. How do you feel about that? How do you approach that as a brewer? Do you feel ever boxed in by a certain style category?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I do think style categories adapt and change. I think it was mentioned that, a style is really just a snapshot of like a certain type of beer brewed at a certain time in history. So especially when we're talking about American style beers, say, American IPA, then yeah, it's like, it's ever changing. And so I think depending, you may have, our West Coast IPA doesn't use any C hops, which you talked, doesn't use Cascade, Citra, Chinook, Centennial, which that's sort of like the classic West Coast IPA. And, we feel like that is shifting, but I do feel like, people have tried our IPA and they're like, that's not a West Coast IPA. And, it's definitely not a tradition. It's not a West Coast IPA from 15 years ago. I think nowadays it's becoming more common, and those hop profiles are starting to pop up. But yeah, I think that's a piece of it where, we're, maybe adapting or not adapting as brewers. And then that can, depending on who you're talking to, I can see where you maybe feel like you're getting boxed in to a certain beer because it maybe doesn't allow you to change with ingredients per se. I did want to touch base really quick on the juicy versus hazy that Suzanne had brought up. I think, we use the term hazy. We're on the West Coast, and I don't really feel like New England IPA and hazy, I think, are more or less the same thing. I feel like since I'm so removed, I don't feel appropriate saying New England IPA. And that's kind of where we use hazy, but we're differentiating them in our brewery, though the like BA doesn't. And we feel like they are definitely different styles. And I think eventually it will catch up where, style, the BJCP or the BA do update their guidelines. And I think it might be a thing where they do update to sort of make those two distinctions. But for us, juicy is going to be a specific yeast that promotes a ton of juicy character, and certain hops that promote that, but it's going to be an all barley grain bill, whereas hazy is going to include some sort of adjunct, whether it be wheat or oats, or spelt or something of that sorts. And that's kind of how we're differentiating here and explaining that to our customers.
Well, yeah, it's describing two different things. One is aroma / flavor. Another one is an appearance element. So it's really describing two different things. They don't always go hand in hand. And in judging that hazy juicy category, you'll come across some that are really big, juicy orange juice aroma flavor. And then you'll come across others that have that classic kind of C hop character you were describing too. So they're kind of all over the map. Yeah. So that's more fodder for further breakdown in the beer styles, which may anger some people. and it gets to a point that I wanted to bring up with Chris is with so many similar styles, and Chris, we've had beers in your tap room before. I absolutely love Rheingeist Brewery and all the beers that you guys make. One thing that I'm struck with every time I'm in there is how many beers you have on tap. And it's impossible to have that many beers on tap without having a lot of them, which are, similar styles. And, I wonder if you experience any pushback from customers, or if you hear anything about that, or if it's if maybe even from taproom staff, about having to deal with navigating these very subtle distinctions between one style or another.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we certainly are challenged by that on a regular basis. We also, from relatively often, have two beers that are the same style on at the same time. Given the number of beers that we have in different bar locations and things around the facility, and I think that's okay. But it's also makes it is really challenging, particularly for our bar staff, to be able to navigate that and to be able to explain that. There have been times where you could come in and get a flight of all double IPAs, right? And they're all very different. They may have different grain bills, different aroma profiles, totally different, hop characteristics, but technically they're all double IPAs, right? And I think it gets really tough as well, because some of our styles, a beer that we've made since the day we opened, almost 9 years. It's a English style dark mild. Look, those of us that are probably everyone attending this panel is at least somewhat familiar with a dark mild. But in the reality, when I explain that to somebody who doesn't know what it is, it's a baby brown ale, right? That's all it is. But if you have mild ale up there, people, if they don't know what it is, it's the impetus is on them to ask, or on our team to suggest that beer. And they do a great job of that, but not everybody's going to get there. They don't necessarily know what color it is. I always like to tell the story of, there used to be a bar near where I lived, and people would often ask, what's the lightest beer you have? And my friend who bartended there, she would say color, calories, or taste. It's a different answer. They had Guinness, right? Like very low calorie, very low alcohol, but dark and flavorful compared to some of the other offerings they had. And I think getting that out of, getting the consumer's desire out of them can be really difficult. And I think a lot about the fact that there are some styles that sound very similar but aren't. And on the other side of that coin, there's styles that sound very different but are actually very similar. And if you're not well trained and knowledgeable and able to make those connections, whether you're a consumer or a bartender or a sales rep or anyone, then you can miss out. And everybody on this live stream, we all enjoy trying new things and exploring and understanding beer, hopefully, or you clicked on the wrong link or something. But that's what drives us to try new things. And you have to have that curiosity to make that leap of faith a little bit on something that you don't know what it is, and being able to have a conversation about it, which is why one of the things that I love trying new beers, and I almost exclusively do it in public, at a bar, at a brewery, because I can ask questions. I can have a conversation with somebody, and I think that's just that gets down to the core of what we all should be looking to do. Is style. It's a guideline, but it's not meant to be. I don't think every beer needs to fall into a discrete style. Style's context and it's a framework, but there's going to be things that are, we've all had things that are super weird. And yeah. I've had things that are super weird and delicious, and things that are super weird and not delicious, but that had nothing to do with the fact that it was or wasn't to style.
Yep. I love that bit about the lightest beer. Are you talking about color, calorie, or flavor? It reminds me of being at a cafe in Belgium several years ago, and I wasn't sure what I wanted, and the server said blonde or brown, and I forget what I answered, and then their next question was sweet, sour, or bitter. And right there they were like, here's the beer for you. And it was like, wow, okay, cool, we just bypassed this whole thing and you just got me the exact beer that I was in the mood for. Yeah, that was great. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time here, and plus I am out of beer, which means that we should go to questions. I do have a few of them here for the panel. One that caught my eye here, which is right in line with what we were talking about. Why should someone who isn't a mega beer nerd care about beer styles? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I'll throw one thing in there, and I'll be brief. Is that I would answer that question with a question, which is annoying, but how important is it to you to be an informed consumer? If it's not very, then feel free to not care. But if you if you do, care about what you're getting and want your expectations to be met and want to alleviate any degree of, or not any, but the majority of your potential buyer's remorse, then it's a good thing to dabble in.
Yeah. So you don't necessarily have to care about it.
No.
Yeah.
You don't have to care about anything if you don't want to.
Let's see, what else do we have here? How do the panelists deal with the emergence of new styles? When new styles emerge, there can be wide variances in interpretation. So it's hard to describe the style with consistency. Anybody want to tackle that? I think I have my own take on this, but anybody else want to?
I'll quickly jump in and just, say cold IPA, because I think that is probably one of the newest variations of IPA that currently is widespread. And, 5-8 years ago, it was probably Brute IPA was the one that, a bunch of people were making and people were confused about. I think it's tough. I think until there's more clarification and more, someone like the BA or the BJCP to like nail down, like, hey, this is what makes the style. I think you're going to see breweries all over the board. And I think cold IPA one is one where it's like, there's cold IPAs that aren't using lager yeast, which I would, say that's not really a cold IPA. And I think there's a lot of confusion around that. Luckily with that, I think Kevin Davey is giving some clarification to that right now and has been explaining that a bit more. But yeah, it's tough. It's harder to know what to expect since every brewery is going to have a different interpretation of that one right now.
Yeah.
Just to add, I was just going to add to that, Neil, just by saying, this is something we deal with on a daily basis in retail, selling other people's beer. And, we do a fair amount of digging in, we don't always know what things are, but we go to yeast first. That's our general rule, is what yeast is in this beer. Is it a lager yeast? Is it an ale yeast? Is it a German wheat beer yeast? Is it, something along those lines? Is it some kind of an English, high flocculent, that could be in an IPA? How's that going to affect the way an IPA appears? And then we start to build around it. Do we end up exactly where a brewer would want us to be? We hope, but probably not always. But I think we can take that information and share it with our customers, and I think it makes sense to them. We tell people all the time in retail, what makes a beer different is, exactly, like, let's start with the base of the beer. It's yeast, and then it's the grains that build around it. And, you're going to see certain kinds of grains in certain areas of the world. You're not going to see, certain grains used in certain kinds of beer. You're not going to see wheat and lagers, particularly, so on and so forth. So it's, for us, that's where we start. We dig into yeast and then we build around.
So this is a little bit of a related question. When do you think diversion from a style should no longer be described as the style it references? For example, should a barrel-aged raspberry chocolate Pilsner still reference the Pilsner style name?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, immediately when you said that, I would put that in the barrel-aged section. For me, I don't know that that's the right answer, but it's got fruit, it's got a lot going on. It may have Pilsner malt. I'm not sure why pale malt. I'm not sure exactly why they'd be calling it a Pilsner, but also some of this is fun and some of this is marketing. But I think for me in a beer like that, the most important component is that it touches a barrel, and that changes everything.
Yeah. How much of there's a point at which it ceases to become a Pilsner or have any Pilsner character anymore. And I think at that point, that's in my mind, that's when you should probably lose that Pilsner designation. Yeah,
I mean, we do get asked those questions. I can't remember exactly the last one, but sometimes I just tell the customer it's just marketing. That piece of the description is just marketing. Like, just forget about that. This is, this is an IPA, or that, in Chris's example, that this is an amber or brown colored beer, and it's moderate in alcohol strength, and it may have a slightly elevated hop character over what you would expect in a typical amber. You know, there are ways to get at it. I think the more we talk to customers, at least I'm hopeful, and I sort of believe in that trinity of kind of, the more we talk to customers, the more we take the time to answer the questions, and not being that sort of person that Brian described, not being kind of arrogant or short or curt or cutting, when, you know, you see the flip side of it is that, like, well, there's snobs that work in beer places, or like all the people that work at the bar at Rheingeist are all like super smart, and I don't like to talk to them because they make me feel like I'm dumb. You know, there's that flip side of it for us. And it's like, you know, we don't ever want to be perceived that way. We want to be perceived as informational, approachable, and, you know, helping people get across the line, you know, for themselves, whatever it is. It's a different line, you know, it's a 10-yard line, it's a 50-yard line, it's all the way down the field. Depends on, you know, how much people want to know about it.
Yeah. So one last question here that I think is interesting, and we may or may not have the answer to this. Do you know if the wine industry faces the same issues? Can we draw some insights towards education of staff, consumers, and so on from them? You know, my first impression with that is, you know, wine is a different animal. It's a varietal, and that's how wines are classified. But at the same time, you've got, you know, you do have blends, and, you know, those blends, they may be unique, and they may share characteristics from, you know, from both or, you know, multiple grape varieties. And I think that's where you kind of see the parallel with beer, where you've got some beers that are a pure straight up interpretation of a given style, some that are kind of a hybrid between different styles. And I just kind of see that style designation as a way to communicate the idea of what that beer is and what the expectation should be to the drinker. And if it's a hybrid between them, you could say, hey, you know, you're going to get a little bit of this style and a little bit of this style. And you're still using that kind of baseline to help people understand a little bit more. So I think kind of at the end of the day, that's kind of what this whole breakdown is. It's an understanding. You know, these styles were, you know, ostensibly for judging purposes. And that's where the real, like, nitty gritty breakdown of details is the most appropriate. But, you know, that's a great jumping board and a great kind of baseline to use for general discussion and understanding amongst beer drinkers and enthusiasts. I want to thank everybody for being here. The panel's been great. You guys have been, you know, super awesome. I want to thank everybody for showing up. One more reminder to go ahead and click that subscribe button, subscribe to the Cicerone YouTube channel, and get alerts about all the things that we're doing here. You know, if you came in late and you want to be able to watch this again, we are going to be posting the recording of this on our YouTube channel. Yeah, check it out there, and check out all the other stuff we've got. So, you know, again, thank you very much to all of our panelists, Suzanne, Jason, Chris, Brian. I really appreciate all of you being here. Cheers, everyone. Have a great day.